Finance. This is January 11th, and today we are going to be hearing from the schools, and they've asked to do this as kind of a panel. So we will bring chairs up and they can talk. I think you all know we have a forecasted 18% increase in could be higher, plus some heavy municipal ones, and we're just trying to figure out what pressures are driving the costs. And are these one-time pressures, are these ongoing? Have we got a one-time issue and we've just got to find some money to throw at, or have we got something that's really systemic?
Right. Thank you.
Okay.
Should we just start?
Introduce yourselves for the record, so we know who's speaking.
Certainly. For the record, I'm Jeff Francis, the Executive Director for the Vermont School Superintendents Association.
I'm Morgan Daybell. I'm the President of the Vermont Association of School Business Officials, and I'm the Business Manager for Franklin Northeast Supervisor.
Good afternoon. I'm Chris Hennessy. I'm the Superintendent of the Barre Unified Union School District.
I'm Libby Bonesteel, Superintendent of Montpelier Roxbury Public Schools.
Okay, so we have a...
Sure. I'll start, and I probably should start by saying I took the exact wrong seat because at 2 o'clock, PCB testimony starts in the House Education Committee, and I'm going to lead these folks to go to that. But by way of introductory remarks, both the School Superintendents Association and the Vermont Association of School Business Officials, along with the School Boards Association, has done a lot of work through the fall till right now, helping school districts prepare for the budget cycle that they're in, which is FY25. And the work started by making sure that there was good familiarity with Act 127 and that folks understood sort of the course of the budget cycle this year. And I think it's fair to say that there was a lot of anticipation around Act 127 and the changes in the weights because all of our organizations supported Act 127 for its equity purposes, and we still do. What we learned as the school budgets process started to develop locally was that we were contending with a confluence of factors, some well-known, some unforeseen. And each of these folks are going to talk about those factors. The factors that I want to just identify as part of my introductory comments are, as you indicated, Senator Cummings, the cost pressures on local school districts, which are now well understood by the school systems themselves, and we're going to talk about at some length. Also, the implications of the changes of the weights, which was well known in terms of what the effect would be. How provisions of Act 127, including that tax capping mechanism.
That's we're starting to hear
right, that feature, how that is actually playing out in terms of the effects on the education funding formula. And then in sort of the most recent dramatic news, the January 1 announcement of the common levels of appraisal, community to community.
Right.
So if I was to put it in the most simple terms, what I would say is school districts, in an effort to do best by for students and taxpayers, were working to contend with the cost pressures. They were doing it in a changed scenario because of the education funding formula changes associated with the weighting changes, and then the effects of the common level of appraisal.
Okay.
All of that sort of culminated first on December 1 and December 2, when the tax letter came out, and the governor, I would say not surprisingly and appropriately, drew the public's attention to a 12% projected increase in education spending and a commensurate 18% increase in property taxes, which I think caught everybody by surprise. And then since that time, the news has not really gotten any better. In terms of other comments that I'll make, to me, as a sort of a veteran working with school districts, the more you sort of think about what has transpired, the less surprising it is. Which isn't to say that I myself wasn't surprised, but the manifestation of the education funding system in Vermont plays out across 121 school districts. And those school districts have a wide array of characteristics. They've got different histories. They've got different voting patterns. And those 121 districts are governed by now nearly 800 school board members. We've got 56 superintendents, 56 business managers, and electorates in every community. So when you think about applying the new funding formula, that too has played out differently in a lot of communities. So, here we are. We've spent the first 2 weeks of the legislative session talking to various committees and individual legislators about our understanding of what's transpiring and how it's playing out locally. Obviously, our hope is that we get a healthy passage rate of school budgets in March, so that the schools can continue to do the job that they do, which is respond to the needs of kids and taxpayers. But I would say that challenge is more precarious in our eyes this year than it has in my recent memory.
I think I've been here since you started with the superintendent.
Right.
And this is the worst year I've ever seen.
Right.
And I've been on this committee, most of it, and chairing it for
Sure.
part of it.
So the way that the testimony is organized is Mr. Daybell first, who got a lot of technical awareness of how the formula works and also administers the business operations in the school system himself. He's going to talk about the cost pressures and then how we see the CLA and the student weighting play a role. And then you'll hear the sort of the tale of two cities. And I think you probably, this as a senator for Washington County, you've got the Barre School District and the Montpelier School District, which among the 121 districts that I referenced, they have stories all their own, and they're going to share those stories with you. By the time that we're through, we hope that you and the other senators who are with us virtually are going to have sort of a better picture, at least as how it's depicted by us working in the field.
Okay. One question, I know that's you and Mr. Dado, but yesterday, the day before, some of us started to hear that the interpretation of the 5% cap was that it was only on the residential properties that were not income sensitized. And for those of us that voted for the bill, I don't think we ever anticipated anything like that, but is that how you're?
So we've asked that question of Julia Richter and Brad James themselves.
Okay, Julia's our.
Right. And I would be hard pressed to explain the answer that they gave us. Because the way the question was asked to us is, and I'm paraphrasing, but the 5% cap that is available to homestead property taxpayers who are paying on their property tax rate rather than income sensitized, that the income sensitized people are getting some benefit of the law too, right? I mean, that's how it was. So I asked Julia and Brad, and they responded, but I couldn't repeat the response. Maybe Morgan can do better with it.
I don't know that I can do better, and it is an area that we've been asking a lot of questions of the AOA and JFO.
Before you start, I just need you to introduce yourself for the record,
Okay,
just
again.
who you are and.
Sure, again, Morgan Daybell, I'm the president of VASBO, and I'm the business manager for Franklin Northeast Supervisory Union. In regards to the income sensitivity and how that plays out, my understanding is that if I'm paying based on income, I'm getting a credit that's applied to a tax bill, and that tax bill is going to see a 5% cap on it. So I'm getting some benefit, even if it's not as direct a benefit as someone who's paying.
Okay, I'm gonna
full
take on
free.
that.
But
Your budget, what goes out for vote, your tax impact can't go up more than 5%. But I understand quite a few of the budgets are going up more than 5%. So who's paying the differential? And I will have to sit down with Julia because if you pay on your income, that also goes up based on how your school is spending in comparison to other schools. And is that the 5%?
My understanding is that there's no 5% on that piece of it. So
Okay,
as my district spends more, the people who are income sensitized are getting a little bit less of a benefit because of that higher spending.
okay. But if everybody goes up 15%, you're only gonna get penalized if the average is 15, the ones that go 18 are the ones that will be paid. Okay,
Yeah, it's good. It's a very good question. On the day that Julia's in here to explain it, I'll be in here too.
she's probably listening now.
Yeah.
I mean, this came up in money chairs that everybody's trying to figure out what we intended and what we actually did.
Right.
Because it's a complex system.
Yeah.
You move something here and something there pops, so. And that bill came through, as I remember, came into this committee. I have a vision of it coming in here when it was dark. It was one of those end of the year
Mm-hmm.
in and out bills, so we will see what we did.
Right, got it.
So in my testimony, I'm going to reference specific budgetary pressures as they play out in my two districts. And my districts are both seeing a benefit from the more accurate pupil weights under Act 127 and also a benefit from the changes under Act 173, which changed special education
You're up
funding.
in Franklin
Northeast, yes.
East.
So what I have.
My daughter's in
Richard-
Swanton, is on the school board.
Okay, I don't have
You
Swanton.
don't have Swanton, okay.
Yeah. So I say that, but I can say with confidence that the budgetary pressures are facing all of us across the state, no matter how those two laws are impacting us. And I think that you're going to hear similar testimony from everyone because of that. And so for us, staffing costs are a significant driver. We have one of the lowest salary schedules in our area. And we're within commuting distance of one of the higher paying districts in the state. So in recent settlements, we've been trying to close that gap because we frankly find it hard to find teachers that are willing to come. We're also coupling that in an environment where there's high inflation and there's, in general, people are less interested in working in school systems. Because of how contracts are bargained, individual districts across the state, we know going into those negotiation sessions that when we come up with a higher than normal settlement, that's used as a comparable for other districts in the state, certainly within our region. And so as a rural district, where these candidates are already hard to come by, we continue to serve as a farm team for other parts of the state. And so that's all background for saying that we have put a lot of effort in increasing teacher salaries, and that has a direct impact on the budget. Sort of related to that are health insurance costs, and we've seen health insurance costs go up over 16% this year, second year of double increases. In my district, we spend $730,000 just for health insurance, and it makes up about 11% of our budget. And so 16% on top of 11%, where we have no ability to negotiate, is significant. We know that the statewide bargaining for healthcare at least prevents us from negotiating against each other district to district, but we've seen no savings overall in terms of healthcare costs. As you know, we are coming up on the last year of ESSER. We've long seen this cliff coming. Most of us are still facing the challenges of coming out of the pandemic. And so the positions that we've piloted under ESSER are still considered necessary as we continue to work on lost learning opportunities and helping mental health needs of students and their families. We had some benefit going into this in that we knew that ESSER cliff was coming in the same fiscal year that we were gonna see additional weights under Act 127. And in theory, those were gonna help for us cancel those out.
This is the
That's
perfect
opposite
storm.
in some places.
And this building has rumors about what are they thinking and doing. I'm sure you have the same rumors about us. But ESSER money was one that the legislature had no fingers on. And we were very careful to make sure our money went into one-time programs, not into continuing. And just, there's some people say, well, some schools just brought down their tax rates and now it's gone. But I think we had some pretty good years when the sales tax was coming in hard and strong, and we had picked up Wayfair, and so we think artificially bought down, not intending to, but rates have been lower because we had more income, and so it's part of the perfect storm. That income now, our sales tax numbers are back to normal, but my goal is to get all the issues out and make sure that we're all working in the same direction.
Yeah, if I may, we're in the same position you are in terms of working in the same direction. One of the things that I confront working in the building every day, having a legislature come up to me and say, I understand that a lot of ESSER positions were added and none have been removed. And my response to that is, that's not my understanding. So each of these folks are going to be able to talk, if you'd like, about how they regarded ESSER positions. I think the one issue or two issues, one goes to what Morgan said, which is the learning needs that students have as exacerbated by the pandemic have a residual effect. So some of the positions that were added appropriately to contend with those learning needs during ESSER are not being precipitously cut in certain school districts because the needs persist. And these folks are going to talk about diminished capacity in the mental health system that schools are relying on heavily.
Yes.
So they'll talk about that.
That's an ongoing issue.
But when I sort of, in my role, talked with superintendents about what I was hearing on ESSER positions, I heard, in some instances, positions have been reduced, and you're going to see examples of that here. In other instances, they were maintained under the cap mechanism that we talked about as they were phased out over the 5-year implementation cycle of 127. So I don't want to oversimplify it, but when you refer to FY25 as a perfect storm as a result of a confluence of these factors, that is the right characterization.
Yeah, because the mental health issues, ESSER was there to help you through COVID, but when COVID ended, the issues, the learning issues for many kids and the health issues for many kids did not go away.
Right.
And we have not, when you're trying to balance the budget and it's 10 o'clock at night, it's very easy to level fund agencies.
Right.
And after a few years, and they are having the same housing issues. And Senator Ram Hinsdale and I and Senator Brock are in the morning economic development. We're working on housing because we know it's impacting teachers, it's impacting mental health workers, it's impacting everybody but the very rich.
Right.
So I got a thumbs up from Senator Ram Hinsdale.
And so the last budgetary pressure that I would point to is mental health. And as we all know, needs have been increasing over the last 4 years at the same time that the capacity of the mental health system has been declining. As public schools, we can't turn kids away if they're too complicated or too hard. So they are in our schools, and we are working and adding resources in order to address those needs. Over the past few years, in my 2 districts, we've hired additional school psychologists, family engagement coordinators, assistant principals, behavior analysts, and an SEL coordinator. A lot of these are the positions that we funded through ESSER as a pilot and had the intention to move those into either other grants or the local budget as we came into FY25. Next year, we're planning on adding another behavior analyst, a therapeutic social worker, another family engagement coordinator, and another assistant principal. And all of these, whether it's directly or indirectly, are to address those mental health needs, and their time and effort that are spent making our students more available for learning rather than actually focusing on academics. And then as we started with Jeff's testimony, these budget drivers are complicated by the two other factors that we mentioned, Act 127, negotiating those new weights, and then how we will be funding these caps. You asked that at the beginning. So if we're capping a tax rate, that money still needs to come from somewhere.
I was gonna say that, yeah, you're capping your tax rate, but your budget is still your budget.
So if we're doing that, if we're raising that money by pushing the yield rate down, it's the district like Chris's that are gonna be picking that up. And these are the very districts that were meant to benefit under Act 127. And I say that, and I do wanna stress that, as Jeff mentioned, I've not heard anyone of my colleagues question the intent of Act 127, the logic behind the new weights, or the logic behind coming up with some sort of soft landing for districts that are seeing a negative impact from 127.
Yeah, I would assume many of your districts would benefit, especially since we added the rural category, which I have some concerns about, because if we take care of all the other needs, I'm not sure just being rural means you're more difficult to educate or take special effort. And I would assume schools that are, mainly rural areas, that's what you know how to do, is educate children from rural areas.
And I don't know that it's that those kids are more difficult to educate, but more expensive to educate. We have longer bus routes.
Yeah, But we
It's smaller
subsidize.
scattered about schools.
we do, the state does pay for transportation.
Yeah.
The other thing to take into consideration with the rural piece of the weights is that if you merged, you don't qualify. So I have one of the most
Yes,
rural districts or rural schools in the state, and they don't qualify for that.
Right, and it is definitely a rural town.
And then the last issue is the impact of the common level of appraisals. As you know, that's not, CLAs do not increase budgets, but they change who's
They
paying for those
equalize it,
budgets.
yeah.
And the movement because of the the housing market has added a lot of more uncertainty and confusion this year to a form that's already uncertain and confusing to folks. When we go in front of voters in multiple town districts, we have to explain to them why the tax rate that we talk about, a district-wide tax rate, is not what's on their bills, and why Chris in the town next to my town in that same district can have wildly different tax rates. We know the answer to that question and we can try to explain it to people, but it increases, I think, the suspicion of the funding system.
Well, yes, my kid is going, and my tax rate is this, and my sister's kid's 2 towns over going to the same school and getting everything the same, and my tax rate's $300 more than hers, so, yeah, it does. But we did run that by our fiscal people, and we're told the CLA isn't raising your taxes per se. It's actually, it's equalizing it.
But there may be a way to use that equalization and apply it to property tax bills, so my assessment number changes, but we're paying the same tax rate. So if we each have a $200,000 house on paper, but my CLA is 100%, so I should be paying on $200,000 house. Chris's is 80%, so you should be paying on a $240,000 house.
Yeah.
His tax bill would say $240,000, mine would say $200,000, and we would have the same rate.
Oh, they have it reflected in the appraisal number.
Right.
Okay, we're gonna have to tax people in, so we'll talk about that.
I'm gonna go
Oh,
around.
no, you can go, Jeff, I can make it up.
It's okay, fine, excuse me.
Eventually, we're gonna have to deal with that too.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
See you.
We'll all get through
Both
this.
parties are in capable hands.
We'll get through this.
So I was lined up next, unless you have,
It's up to
questions for
you.
Morgan?
We
All three of us are sticking around for questions.
Yeah,
If you have any there.
and, move a chair, you can grab that chair, it's much more comfortable.
I didn't understand why Jeff wanted us to sit in the hard chairs. but-
All you have to just
Punishment.
introduce yourself for the record, whoever goes first.
So my name's Libby Bonesteel. Again, I'm the superintendent for Montpelier Roxbury School District. Thanks for having me in today. And I'm gonna do more of a read and then please interrupt me if you have questions. While I can talk about the Montpelier Roxbury budget story in depth, I would also like to provide this committee with a statewide perspective in 4 different areas, some of which Morgan has already touched on. The pressures on the education fund, the human resource needs of Act 173 and multi-tiered systems of support, which I'll refer to as MTSS, the healthcare increases and the impact of the CLA on the public's perception of a school district's budget. So I'll start with the pressures on the education fund. Because of the difference between the equalized tax rate that's capped at 5% and what school districts' needs are, in addition to the fact that the new weights are counting more students for the education fund to support, the education fund will be making up the difference as written in Act 127, just what you've been talking about.
Yeah, and that's, I'm wondering if, when we added that new category of rural, if we did in fact create more, more students that has tipped that balance.
I think all of the weights add more students.
They do, but rural is the one new one. I don't think anyone objects to English as a second language
Right.
or poverty, but
The middle level and the high school have been changed as well. So before it was elementary and secondary, and now it's elementary, middle as defined by 7 through 8 or 6 through 8, I think. And high, that's 9 through 12. So there's some differences there, but it's still
Yeah.
relatively a similar category. They're just
Okay.
split up differently. But this type of pressure on the education fund is unprecedented, making it hard to predict what such pressures will do to the dollar yield in future years. So the various pressures on the ed fund have created a $6,272 drop in the dollar yield in 1 year. I've been superintendent for 6 years. That has never happened, ever. It has increased by hundreds. Now we're talking about decreasing
yeah,
by
and
thousands.
it's predicted to go down next year. Yeah,
We can make an educated guess that because the education fund will continue to feel pressures, the dollar yield will continue to drop over the next 5 years. If dollar yield's impact on the equalized tax rate is left unaddressed, it may not matter if you're advantaged, like these 2 gentlemen here, or disadvantaged like mine because of Act 127. Both of us, regardless of who we are, because that dollar yield has such a significant impact, will be facing a significant tax spike in fiscal year 30. Basically negating Act 127 and what it was supposed to do for districts. The human resource needs for Act 173 implementations and an effective MTSS model. So ESSER funding will soon expire, what we were talking about earlier. There have been many references made to me and other superintendents about the extra positions that school districts added using ESSER funding. I argue that referring to these positions as extra is detrimental to what school districts are trying to do. ESSER dollars allowed for districts to increase our human resources needed for an effective MTSS model faster, a model that's required in Act 173. These positions are still needed. In addition, the mental health system for children across Vermont is not effective. As such, nearly every school district is building from the ground up our own mental health centers for children. That's a significant cost. So in 2021, my district has had doubled our spending in this area. In 2021, we were at 1.4 million being dedicated to mental health and social emotional learning. In the FY25 budget, we will be spending approximately $3 million. So in just 3 years, we've doubled that need. And that looks like 12 positions dedicated solely to mental health and SEBL.
What's driving that? Is it,
We're seeing children that, who come in with significant needs that we've never seen before. And as Morgan referenced, the ability for us to go to the experts in this field, the mental health field, or placements outside of public school perhaps who specialize in this type of behavior or need for student
used to be
is
the big issue, was
essentially
special ed.
non-existent. It's non-existent right now. The wait lists are out of this world.
So they're so long, so it's gonna deal with the kid in-house because there's no placements out.
Yes, so I think Jeff mentioned, 122 districts, that's 122 mental health service centers for students, which economy of scale does not work.
And as Morgan said, by law, we have to educate, and we should be a moral obligation, but we have to answer the bell for those kids every day.
The other thing that I have had a drumbeat on, which I'm sure you've seen in Montpelier Facebook or Front Porch Forum at some point or another, is that I would argue that there's been less learning loss and way more loss of community for our students and our families.
Yes.
And when you lose community, you lose interaction, you lose the abilities, you lose the skill development in that area. And that plays out on a recess, at a recess time period. So the needs of our students are much different. And I can say that the system we've developed is working in Montpelier Roxbury to a price tag. It costs money because we need high quality individuals.
If you don't do it, we're gonna deal with it somewhere else, either in unemployment or criminal justice, or the kids don't have the appropriate social skills and mental stability to function well in the world. We've got to deal with it early.
The healthcare increases, as Morgan mentioned, we have not seen the decrease on budgets or the impact on budgets that the statewide collective bargaining was hoped for at its passage. Increases have climbed year by year. We now are at a 16.4% increase in 1 year. At MRPS, this equals a nearly $400,000 increase in our general budget, of which we don't have control over. Common levels of appraisal's impact on school budgets is a really interesting piece of this pie, and it's separate from Act 127, but it's convoluted.
So
The CLA is a fact. It's a factor that's out of our control, and yet it's attached to the educational tax calculation and has a significant impact. That's why I say people's perception of our tax bill versus what our actual impact on taxes
we
are.
have done everything we know how to put things on the ballot.
Yeah.
I know,
right?
I don't think, people don't read when they come to vote.
It's tough.
They're there to vote, and they made up their mind, and that, we know that communication.
And there's some other pieces of this. So Colchester, for example, has not been reappraised since 2011. This is way beyond the 6 to 10 years it's supposed to be done. So Colchester CLA is at an all-time low at 66.76%. This drop alone is responsible for a 15% tax hike for the citizens in Colchester. Montpelier is a really interesting session. We just reappraised. So when voters voted our budget in last year, the CLA was at a 77 point something percent. But it reappraised, and the reappraisal came through prior to the tax bills being sent out. So the tax bills represented the new reappraisal amount, which was 113, which is beautiful for the FY24 bill. We were anticipating that beauty to come in FY25. It didn't. So now we're dealing with a 13% decrease. So our CLA in Montpelier is now at 100%, which typically I would celebrate, but from a 13% decrease, it's not helping us, it's hurting us. So in order to go even close to our FY24 property tax after the CLA is factored in, we would need to cut $3.4 million from our budget to come even close to it because of that 13% drop.
The city's looking at significant tax increases, and I don't know about you, but I think there'll be people in the street.
Yeah, it's tricky. From across the state, Burlington, who's a city advantaged by Act 127, would have an 8% tax increase if they came in at a level funded budget, and the 8% is all due to a decrease in the CLA. Maple Run in St. Albans is a disadvantaged district, and it sees a 15% increase in the town, in St. Albans town, and a 24% increase in Fairfield due only to a decrease in CLA. And Morgan referenced this in his testimony as well, if the CLA was applied to the homestead value instead of adjusting the education tax rate, the state would still be producing the same amount of revenue, and it would be a more accurate representation of what the
More
CLA is meant to do.
understandable.
Right.
I think that your house is worth more here than it says on our appraisal sheet, because this is what the market is saying your house is worth. Make it easier for realtors if it was. But, yeah, and we will definitely have the property and valuation people in and talk about, I'm sure, just given the system, there's some blip in there. we
I'm
have
sure
to
there
bring in.
is, yeah, like this
But
is,
it would be more understandable,
I think so.
yeah.
So I would just end by saying this is complicated and there is no one fix, as you just said, Senator Cummings. And I don't want the legislator to get the feeling that superintendents and business managers are coming just to cry wolf. We want to be a part of the solution, and hope that we can continue to have collaboration for future years, because it's going to matter quite a bit for our taxpayers and for our school districts.
It is, and the long-term fix is we need more kids in our schools. That number is going down. How many are in Montpelier High School now?
We have approximately 360.
Okay, so that's about what it was when my kids were there.
We're dropping slowly at MRPS, so it's not a precipitous drop year by year, but it's a slow,
Yeah.
it was projected slowly
There were
decrease.
100 kids in the class when my two oldest were there. So that's, and Montpelier has lost similar amounts of, the Barry's lost a lot, so, yeah. I'll say it, no, I'll get another thumbs up from Senator Ronk and Steph, but we do need moderate housing. Okay, any questions? Any questions from all the faces on the screen? Okay, Randy, any questions?
This is the
Jason?
most difficult question of all, that in a way I hate to ask. But if you were to erase everything that we have, and if you would burn the legislation that we passed and start all over again, how would you raise revenue for education? If you had a choice and you didn't have the constraints that you're faced with now, how would you raise revenue for
I'm gonna look to
education?
Morgan to answer that question, because he's the most astute.
Are you gonna give me the matches to do that?
Thanks, Morgan.
He will.
I think, I'm gonna sort of dodge first. I think that we all recognize that we have one of the fair systems, one of the more equitable systems of raising revenue for education in the country. And so I would not want anything to hurt that, to go back on the intent of Act 127. I know that the legislature is looking at income. I think we have in part an income-based system, and it is confusing as the dialogue we just had about, whether the cap helps those folks or not. If we were to move part of it to an income-based system, I realize that we still have those use taxes that need to come in to support the ed fund. We still have property that is non-homestead and so not subject to that income sensitivity that generates a significant amount of money. And so I think at some level that also needs to be preserved.
We did have a study a year ago in the fall at looking at doing a local income tax. But we do have a Supreme Court mandate that we have to equalize that.
Right.
And the minute you start to do it, after 2 months of looking at charts and graphs and, there was no way you could do it so that the bulk of the payment went to the wealthiest people. There were always strange little blips. And how we do that, if we can get it more equally based. We also have several bills in here to look at to divide out the non-homestead property into perhaps second homes, businesses, so that we can be a little more targeted, perhaps in tax rates. Second homes are definitely being looked at. This might be the year.
Well, since I'm asking horrible questions, I'm gonna ask one more. You know, when we raise money in government, we do it differently than you raise money in your homesteads, your own homes. You decide this is how much money I have and this is how I'm going to spend it. And so the vacation in Switzerland is not going to happen this year. In government, on the other hand, we raise it differently. We ask you, how much do you want to spend? And then we figure out where to get the money from and from whom. If you're in a situation in which you're faced with a situation in which you don't have all the money that you need and that you're asking for, and you've got to make the hard decisions of prioritizing, if you had the ability to do that, where you spent the money, what would you cut?
It's a really good question that we work on through our budget cycle the entire season. And I will tell you quite honestly that my leadership team and I have a prioritized list asking just that, you know, so.
We're doing the same.
Yeah, and we have very long conversations.
Every good manager
around
does.
that,
And
yeah.
I'm just interested in
And there are lots of pieces. One of the challenges with school buildings is that they're personal. And we're governed by a relatively volunteer school board who care quite a bit about their school district. They wouldn't be spending the time on the board if they didn't, and the people inside of it. And as a superintendent of a small school district, I care quite a bit about my people who are inside of it. The places where the biggest impact we'll have on budgets is salary and benefits. That is 80% of our budget. And so if I'm over the next 5 years, for instance, to bring it back to 127, I will need to cut. I won't ever be able to be back to my historic levels, ever. It just won't happen. We will have a tax increase in Montpelier and in Roxbury in FY30. That will be pretty big, because I've modeled out that we'll need to cut about $6 million in order to get anywhere near the 5% tax cap, not historic levels, but the 5% level.
That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of
Unavoidable.
people. I cannot make that type of cut without looking at people who service students. And this budget season in particular is a really good exemplar of that, where my leadership team and I thought long and hard about which positions could potentially be the first ripped from that group, and we had reasons behind our decisions, and it equals about 3 FTE, 3 people essentially. And my school board really was challenged with that. And this is 3. We're going to have to be talking of in the 10s and 20s in the future. So that's one place that it's really difficult when you're working with people who care about people, and that is a hard thing to do in a public meeting. Also with that person who knows their position, that is hard to do. So that's one factor. I think the other factor is that going back to Act 46, and what was the intent of 46 was to be a better economy of scale with consolidating districts. And we've lost that a little bit of that piece. So, I run a 42-person schoolhouse, and I could fit those children and do a very good job educationally at a different school. But again, it's personal. It's the center of a person's community. It is something that people love and hold true to. And so that's going to be a very hard conversation for, again, a volunteer school board to make.
I would just add, Senator, that it's just to enhance what Libby's talking about here, is so much of people business that we're in, and each community has its specific emotional ties to those schoolhouses that we're talking about. And, in Barry, we're about 75% of our budget is people. And Barry, and I'll mention in my testimony here, we're a historically low spending district. So as somebody who spent most of my career working in Barry, but have had periods of his career working in higher spending districts like Montpelier and I was in Harwood, I've been able to see both as a teacher, administrator, and as superintendent, how low spending districts are really operating on very thin margins. And Barry has for decades, generations. So we're at a point now where making cuts to the people that Libby's talking about will candidly devastate what is already a very, very thinly staffed program, especially given the needs that we're facing. So you have those practical considerations. I should also note the legal obligations that we have to educate the students who come in our door every day, like Morgan was talking about earlier, that we have to do. We have no choice. Factored into that incredible emotional tie that communities have to their schools. I was the principal at Union Elementary for 5 years down here. Deep emotional ties to that beautiful old schoolhouse that is incredibly expensive to run. So it's
And doing phenomenally.
But those ties as a father who had his children go through there, it's very real. So these are emotional discussions as well as practical fiscal considerations
Some of
too.
these towns, it's not the father, it's the grandfather and
Sure.
great grandfather
Sure.
that went through those schools.
Sure.
And I was chairing education when we did Act 46. And yeah, you can't run a school with 34 kids with any economies of scale, with any, I mean.
Still gotta heat it, still gotta.
Yeah, you've got to heat it, you've got to have a teacher or teachers, and, yeah, you can have 5 kids in a class or 15 kids in a class. I used to have 30 kids when I went to school.
My teaching job in Brooklyn, I had 38 students in my first grade class.
Yeah, and, so leaves, just say 15, but the teacher costs the same, whether you're doing 5 kids or 15 kids. But it is a huge emotional, and in places like Roxbury, that is the center of town. It's the only meeting hall. Being involved in your kids, it is the focus, but it's also very expensive. And I think looking at this, and this isn't a 1-year thing, I don't think. I think these costs are not gonna go away, when COVID disappears. They're pretty,
And I think another example to your question, Senator Brock, and this is an example from one of the towns in your district. Prior to unification, we had 5 separate school boards, 5 separate towns, much smaller, much less flexible budgets. So now my boss was a principal of one of those schools, and when she came to school in September, 3 months into our budget year, we found out that we had 12 high school students who moved in during the year, and we don't operate a high school. So day one, budgets are frozen. Parents, can you please bring in Kleenex? We need Kleenex for our kids. We're not buying any supplies for that year. And so unlike the decisions we make as families, if I say something wrong here and I go back and I find that I don't have a job anymore, I can cut my cell phone bill, I can cut expenses like that. There are some kids that we will continue to serve, their tuition payments that will still be made, and we don't have the ability to move as quickly.
Well, yeah, thank you. My name is Chris Hennessy, and I am the superintendent of Barry Unified Union School District. And like Libby and Morgan, I'm really happy to be able to have the opportunity to testify here today. I'm going to read my statement like Ms. Bumsteele did, and I have little to add to Morgan and Libby's excellent summaries of the overall challenges districts are facing in this year's budget development cycle. So my plan for you this afternoon is to focus on the specific challenges and opportunities Act 127 presents for the Barry community. I'm going to break my remarks down into the challenges of being a beneficiary of Act 127.
Okay, so you were a beneficiary.
Oh yes, very much so.
Because when we were first doing that, Barry was coming out as not doing
I know.
anything.
We were very worried.
And I knew you were thinking you were gonna get a big gain because.
Well, we just wanted a gain, but we were very worried that was gonna happen. That is not how it turned out, unfortunately
Because
for
I
us.
spent a lot of time with the professor from UVM that helped develop that, saying, why is this happening?
Thank you for speaking on our behalf. And I'm also gonna speak to the specific human resource needs and challenges that Libby's already spoken about and their direct impact on the kids and families in our school community in Barry. So first of all, the BUSD is unquestionably a beneficiary of Act 127. In our view, the law is working as it should to provide opportunities for historically low spending districts like Barry to put needed resources in place for our students. As a result of the new weighting formula, and Senator Cummings, you were just speaking of this, the BUSD went from having a student count of 2,205 kids in FY24, which is last year, to a long-term weighted average daily membership, that new LTWADM figure of 3,703 students for FY25. This increase of nearly 1,500 students in 1 year is a result of more heavily weighting the extraordinarily high number of economically disadvantaged students in our community. And we have created a budget that works with the intent and spirit of Act 127 as a result. The 5% cap on the tax rate puts us in a place where we can go forward with our needs-based budget while keeping our tax rate at a maximum 1.22%, which will surely be among the lowest rates in Vermont. Last year, our tax rate was 1.16. So that 5% cap, we can't go higher than 1.22.
And that was, you had a revote because they thought your budget was too low last year.
That's correct.
So this was the.
That is correct. Our community voted our first pass the budget down because it was too low and passed a higher budget. That is unprecedented and fairly unique, and candidly something I was pretty proud of.
There was some really heavy
for our
PR
community.
going on that one.
Indeed, there was.
You have my grandson in your school, so.
He was a beneficiary of that second pass. As low as this 1.22% tax rate is, however, the new CLAs, common level of appraisal for Barry City and Barry Town, which are very different, by the way, in those two communities, much like the communities Morgan's talking about, will still result in significant education tax increases for our community, no matter what we do.
Barry City said.
76.
Yeah, and they're doing it next year, but I figured that.
Yeah, and
Did Barrytown,
Barrytown has done their appraisal.
I thought they.
Yeah, so they came in, their CLA is 86, Barry City is 76. One thing that Libby and I don't think we've spoken about so far as well, is obviously the enormous impact of the summer floods on both of our communities and the pressures on the municipal budgets as a result of that. Which is
They've also been in this week, so.
right.
Yeah.
So the benefits that Act 127 has provided for our district have nonetheless created a challenging environment for those of us who are responsible for selling our budgets to our communities. The numbers are frankly, and this is not a surprise to anybody in this room, very difficult for the average person to understand. For example, this is a kind of a mind-bending example here. People are asking why their taxes are going up if our tax rate is capped and our per pupil spending is going down 34%, which is exactly what is happening with our new long-term weighted figure in Barry. So this is very hard to explain to folks. We know we're not alone in struggling to help our boards and taxpayers make sense of all of this. But I think the biggest factor that is driving all of this is the human resources needs that Libby was just speaking about. She accurately laid out the challenges districts are facing with the perception that the ESSER funded positions are extra luxuries that we no longer need now that the funding will not be in place and the pandemic is over. In Barry, this has been a major area of concern. And I need to be clear, as clear as I can with this committee and anybody listening, that our needs have never been higher. The academic interventionists, mental health professionals, and other similar positions that were supported under ESSER are needed now more than ever. And importantly, we fear these needs are not going away anytime soon. To be clear, the mental health needs of our community are at an all-time high. I've been an educator for 35 years, and those of us who've been in the field and seen it all, as we said, have never seen anything like the challenges we are seeing, especially with some of our youngest children. And we have increasingly accepted that the responsibility for meeting the growing needs of our students and families are fully on us as a school district. The mental health system that educators collaborated with and relied on for decades is simply too overwhelmed now to provide the support we need, to the point where we just can't count on. Regardless, generational poverty, drug abuse, homelessness have a growing and enormous impact on the day-to-day operations of our schools. For example, in Barry City Elementary and Middle School, school of approximately 800 children, pre-K 850, one of the largest pre-K 8 schools in the state of Vermont, close to 10% of the student population in that school qualifies for benefits as homeless under the McKinney-Vento Act. And this number, to be clear, only tells part of the story about the ways in which many of our families are struggling. Our schools are doing their best to meet the basic needs of our kids every single day. And this work is truly heroic, but it is indeed also very expensive. In Barry last night, our board approved a budget to bring forward to the community that is needs-based and adheres to the intent and spirit of Act 127. It's fiscally responsible, given the incredible complexity and uncertainty surrounding this new law. I'm proud of this budget. I'm proud that we're committed to meeting the needs of our students, but I fully understand the worries, as we all do, the worries and concerns many in our community have around the sustainability of our current system of funding public education in Vermont. It will be on all of us to continue to work together and make sense of this in ways which can meet the needs of our children and our taxpayers. I do want to say I have great respect for the challenging work you folks are doing, and I want to thank you for listening to our testimony.
Folks are on the front line. I think, yeah, I've never seen a year like this. I mean, I asked fiscal people, what would it cost to get the tax rate down to 10%? $120 million, which means you've got to cut 120 million, or we've got to find it, and we don't have any more money than anyone does this year. We've got $100 million worth of flood damage we're dealing with. And we've got flood damage. And we've got the two towns that are looking at some significant tax increases and cuts. And our people, Montpelier is probably fiscally in better shape than downtown in Barry City at least. But I don't think any of us wants to go out and say, well.
Just different degrees of
Yeah.
suffering at this point, quite honestly.
And
Yeah.
finding the solution, saying, this is it. We think waiting may be playing a role, but we can't change anything for this year. But we're not sure what it is, or because I know you all wrote and said, support waiting, but then, and we knew who was going to win and who was going to lose. Barry was on the border and seems to have gone in the right direction, but
I think that those numbers as well, though, that we gained 1,500 students in 1 year,
yeah,
in our view, shows just how tough it has been prior to that
yes,
to maintain our budgets when that wasn't reflected. And now it suddenly is. It gives us some time to make some corrections, but for how long? And
I think also, as you all know, Senator Cummings, when we met in November, is that I was in full support of doing the new weights and recognized the importance of that, and knew that Montpelier Roxbury would need to increase tax capacity to have similar supports. I didn't know the level in which, like the significant, like we're talking major tax increases in order to sustain even somewhat close to what we've had in the past. And And so we just won't be able to, you know, we're
Yeah,
going
no,
to have
It
to,
was the degree, I think.
yeah, we're going to have to cut a tremendous amount of people, probably, in programming for our students. And we still won't be near historic levels. We'll be very far away from them. So, I think Mia Moore, one of my board members, said it to you, we're gonna either increase our tax rate, sky high. We need to find students somewhere to move into a town that has no housing and was decimated this past summer. Or we're gonna have to completely slash our programming. And none of those things seem realistic right now, so it's gonna be
Not for this
tricky.
year, and I'm hopeful that hitting this wall might make us have the really hard decisions. We started with 46, but we're still not there. We still have a whole lot of very small schools. That's our cost per pupil is first or second in the nation. And we need to have those discussions about mergers, about what we can do, about housing, and if you don't have housing, you don't have taxpayers, and you need more taxpayers, and you need more kids, and put 10 instead of 9 in a class, and the costs don't go up. So, But
And the influence, I would reiterate the influence at the 5-year look for FY30 with the ed fund with unprecedented pressures on it because of making up the difference between the cap and the need.
Yeah.
Will not benefit anybody. We will all be in a tax spike situation at FY30.
so, and they'll blame us because we set the tax rate, so.
Oh, don't worry, they'll blame us.
You may have a whole new legislature. Okay, so we'll take a look at that CLA and see if that, because at least then your tax rate would be what the school announces, this is what my budget is, and you go on and on your ballot, you're gonna see that, but it's your appraisal that's going up, because that's really what the CLA is adjusting, is your grand list. So we'll have property valuation in to tell us if that is possible. And then if it's possible for this year. Okay. Any questions? Anybody on the screen? Senator McCormick?
Yeah, it's not a question. I just want to comment what heroic work educators are doing these days under these circumstances, because I'm sitting here trying to think of something brilliant to say as a solution. And it really is, the fact is the taxes are higher than people can afford and the revenues are not adequate to the need. And thank you for doing what you can. So.
Okay.
I was just going to say, I'm sorry that I'm sequestered in another room, not able to be there in person, but thanks so much for that testimony. It's always incredibly helpful to hear clear, accurate, direct reports from the street, and as a former teacher, I'm very sympathetic to the position you're in, and wish you well. Keep on working with my colleagues to see how we can ameliorate where you're at. Barry's been hit hard in recent years.
Okay, I think we're all hit hard this year. I across the board. I mean, the legislature, we have a lot of needs and not a lot of money. Our federal ESSER stuff has all gone away. Opera is all committed. We might have to raise some money, but that's not a popular notion either.
No.
But we'll keep working on it and keep us posted. I know you've got us coming in February, something.
See my board.
And we're going to Barry on the
A couple weeks, 22nd, we look forward to it.
in the morning, so 7 o'clock I like Montpelier a lot better than.
It's the Barry way, 7 o'clock meetings, we're ready to go,
I
on a
know.
Monday, no less.
True, and that's the only day you can get us, because we're here at 8. Okay, so, thank you all.
Thank you for having us
So
today.
we
If
think-
anybody has a
really
brilliant
appreciate it.
idea about something we can do, let us know.
Please.
I'm sure Morgan will come up with
I
something.
really appreciate the opportunity, folks, thank you.
Thank you.
Put these chairs back where they go.
Let's put chairs around here. Okay, committee, I think I have an old agenda.
This is good, yeah.
Something with 3.
It's only 3:45.
Oh, that late. Okay,
What do we have?
another bill,
Yes, we are going over S230,
who's the, see if the drafters can come
Jennifer
talk
Harvey.
to us at 3, and we'll take a 15-minute break, does that work? Check back.
To go offline.
We thought we had all individual testimony, and then they asked, like yesterday, if they could come as a block, which shortened the time frame that we had.
Are you ready to go offline?